Good evening. We're glad that everybody is here tonight. It's good to see you. It's good for all of us to be together. As far as our announcements tonight, it's a pretty long list. Adley Westerfield's going to see an allergist Monday due to some respiratory issues. James Jones, that's the husband of Selena Jones, he came forward last week, rededicated his life to the Lord. We're proud about that. Also, their daughter is having her tonsils taken out Monday. Is that right? Granddaughter. Okay. Having her tonsils taken out Monday at 5 in the morning. At least that's when they have to be there. So that sounds like a lot of fun, doesn't it? Etta Borland is in the Murray County Hospital. She's in room 2422. Chester Uzzle is also sick. He is resting at home. Bill Westerfield, that is the father of Corey, is home, and he is resting and doing well now. Florence Robertson has recovered. They thought she had had a mini stroke of some sort, but her blood pressure is now under control, and she is back at the Stilley House. There will be a bridal shower for Chloe Thompson. That will be this Sunday from 2 to 4 in the shower room. They're registered at Bed Bath & Beyond and at Crate & Barrel, and I don't think it's in the shower room. I think it's in room 50 and 52, which is over by the kitchen. The middle and high school Christmas party will be December 23rd. They're going to leave the building at 11 a.m. to go ice skating in Paducah, and they're going to eat lunch. They'll return to the building that afternoon to have a gift exchange. Please bring a $10 gift if you wish to play the game. Evangelism University, that's in Savannah, Tennessee, will be January 13th through 15th. And it's for everybody from the 8th grade all the way up to high school students. And they'll leave the building at 3:45, return Sunday afternoon about 3, and there is no cost. Challenge Youth Conference is coming up in February, and the cost on that will be $50 per person. The gym is going to be closed December 26th through 28th. That's Monday through Wednesday. And the reason for that is maintenance, as they're stripping and redoing the floor. So Monday through Wednesday after Christmas, the gym will be closed. In January, we're going to be recognizing and praying for our families that have had an addition in the past year or two. Let the office know, and Doug told me this was by birth or adoption. So no puppy dogs, just people. But if you've had a person in your family, whether by birth or adoption, let the office know. We'd like to present them a Bible and pray with them. Also next Sunday will be our Debt Reduction Sunday. Everything given over our budget will go directly to retire our debt. We are 18 months or so away from being debt-free here. So that is a worthy and wonderful goal that we're working on. Sandra has said that the baskets that we usually send to our shut-ins have been prepared the other night by a lot of our ladies, and they're ready to be picked up for delivery. They're in room 50. Now, anybody can take those to the folks, and it's a wonderful way to visit some people. And so as a family, if you would like to do something over the holidays and serving towards other people, and you're looking for something that is easy and direct, then that is the way to do it. All right, our speaker tonight will be Matthew. And I think our song leader tonight will be me, the rate we're going. I try to make those announcements really, really long. So we're going to sing number 852. That's When the Roll is Called Up Yonder. We'll sing the first and last verse. And for our invitation song, we'll sing There's a Fountain Free, first and last verse on that as well. But 852 will be our first song, When the Roll is Called Up Yonder. You got to be Southern to get that yonder in there. All right, let's go. When the trumpet of the Lord shall sound, and time shall be no more, and the morning breaks eternal, bright and fair. When the saved of earth shall gather over on the other shore, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, 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 I'll be there. Let us labor for the Master from the dawn till setting sun. Let us talk of all his wondrous love and care. Then when all of life is over and our work on earth is done, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, 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 I'll be there. Our song of invitation will be There's a Fountain Free, first and last verse.
Thank you for everybody coming tonight to worship the Lord this evening. Tonight I am talking about what Christmas means to Christians. It's a really big and important time of the year for many families around the world. There are many families that are coming together again. The music around us changes. We buy items we wouldn't normally buy. What we see on television changes, and there's a lot of things that change in our society around this time of year. But people just see Christmas differently around the world. Some people see it as the birth of Jesus, which we believe to not be true, and some people just see it as something similar to Thanksgiving, as a time to be around family. But we see it as something kind of with religious undertones and to celebrate God and the opportunity we have of being Christians. So what does it mean to us? Well, the first thing I put is I believe that Christmas is a time of celebration. A good verse for that is Luke 2:10, which says, I bring you good news of great joy that will be for all the people. And it's good because it means that the good news is personal because it says, I bring you. It's positive because it says good news of great joy, and it is universal because it says for all the people. And it's an opportunity for us to celebrate all the blessings that God has given us, like family and material belongings. And we were told to be joyful in all things. And it's just a time to celebrate, remembering that God loves us and is with us at all times. Another thing I put is Christmas is a time for love. All of us know John chapter 3, verses 16, for God so loved the world that he sent his only son, so we could all go to heaven. And it shows that he loves us, and he created us in his image, and he sent his son so we would have an opportunity to be with him. I mean, he created us, so it's obvious that he loves us, and it's not like we can stop him from loving us, because his love for us is based on his character and not our conduct. And it was before we were born that he thought about us, and he still thinks about us right now. And we need to show our love through giving him our blessings and be thankful for him. Also, Christmas is a time of giving, was we give to others to show our appreciation towards them. And it's a time we give cheerfully, and generally our giving is a reflection on how we view our relationship with God. And the heart of the gospel, the crucifixion of Jesus, is basically a sacrificial self-giving. And so we need to trust in God's provision for our family while we give gifts and know that he's in control. And it's a way to show people how grateful we are for them. Another thing I put is Christmas is a time of worship, and it's a time of prayer, and we can pray to God and show our belief in him through our thankfulness in worship. And we can remember our priorities this time of year. And unfortunately for some people, Christmas can be seen as a time of sorrow for various reasons, and Christmas can also be a time after trials where we heal and we renew our strength and we reset our priorities. And it's a time to worship God and be grateful for his son, and Christmas has many religious connotations. The last thing I put is Christmas is a time of faith, Participating in Christmas and all its goodwill is a way to reaffirm our faith and show the way God works. And our faith in God and our hope in our future is built on faith and good works, and that's kind of what builds up Christmas. One of the best things about Christmas, in my opinion, is seeing less fortunate people receive gifts or just receive love and something they don't get every day, and just the excitement they have when they get that. And I feel like we should have that enthusiasm for God and when he gives us things like that all the time, because without him we would be in a similar situation. In conclusion, many people idolize the nativity scene or being with family, but we don't focus on that. We focus on what Jesus did during his life after he got baptized and preaching to God and remembering God in everything he does. And it's a time to celebrate and a time to remember that God is in control, and a time to be joyful. It's a time to love. It's a time to give and others. It's a time to worship, and it's a time to have faith in our future. And so if you want to reaffirm your commitment to God this evening, we ask you to come forward while we stand and while we sing.
There's a fountain free, 'tis for you and me. Let us haste, oh, haste to his spring. 'Tis a fount of love from the source above, and he bids us all freely drink. Will you come to the fountain free? Will you come? 'Tis for you and me, thirsty souls. Hear the welcome call, 'tis a fountain open for all. There's a rock that's cleft and no soul is left that may not its pure water share. 'Tis for you and me, and its stream I see. Let us hasten joyfully there. Will you come to the fountain free? Will you come? 'Tis for you and me, thirsty soul. Hear the welcome call, 'tis a fountain open for all. We're dismissed to class. Proverbs chapter 5. All right. Had to wake him up. Had to wake my sound man up. You awake now? All right. Chapter 5. Chapter 5. We're going to drink some water from our own cistern. All right. If you recall from last week, Colin, it's good to have you back into town. Matthew asked me today if Lipscomb people got out earlier, and I was like, well, what else do they do? But I think everybody has Freed's out this week too, aren't they? Do you know, Tyler? Do you still go to school? School? Yeah. What? What's that? Now, I know Harding's out this week too. We're glad to have you back. All right. We're studying the book of Proverbs, and if you remember in our study last week, we kind of did an introduction of how the book worked. We looked at the background, and we looked at all the different kinds of poetry. Remember, in the Hebrew language, you couldn't really rhyme very much because they didn't have vowels. So the way in which they'd rhyme is they'd make couplets. Sometimes it'd be synonymous. They would say the same thing twice. Sometimes antithetical would be the opposite. Sometimes building or climatic, where it'd be building on one another. And sometimes you have your better thans. And so if you learn those four, you cover everything except about 6 of the Proverbs. But remember, we spent some time, and this may come into practice a little bit today or tonight. Proverbs is inspired, but Proverbs is not 100% correct. Remember, we spent a lot of time working on that last week because I wanted to make sure everybody understood what I was saying. I was not saying that it's wrong, but I was saying that it's a proverb, okay? Penny saved is a penny earned, right? Does that mean every penny you saved you literally earned? Well, sometimes yes, sometimes no. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. Has that all been true 100% of the time? Can you look at every child that left the Lord's church and point at his parents and say it's his fault or her fault? No, not really. Not really. But for the vast majority of the time, as a proverb, it's correct. And so notice as we go through the Proverbs, it's not always correct 100% of the time, but these are general rules which show you how to live. And so we talked about what we're going to do. Tonight we're going to talk about general relationships as we go through it. And remember, we talked about last week how the way the Proverbs is written is like a man sitting with his son in a marketplace. We might think of a man sitting with his son in the mall. You know, you go to the mall, they have the couches, right? And what's the purpose of couches? So that men will go to the mall too, right? You know, men go there, you make them comfortable, that lets the ladies stay a long time. Now, that's stereotypical, very much so. But if you ever notice, you got a lot of the older men sleeping on the couch, right? And so imagine a man sitting there with his son. They're sitting there in a marketplace, and the father is saying, now, son, this is the kind of woman you need. You don't need to find this kind of woman or that kind of woman or whatever else it may be. You need to concentrate on this kind of girl. Now, that sounds strange to us because maybe if you had children, you had that talk, or maybe you thought, well, they'll be fine on their own or whatever else it may be. But this would be very common back in those days, especially when you had an arranged marriage. But what you see in Proverbs is every few chapters, and chapter 9 is really big about it because chapter 9, the women kind of cross directions. But you have the Lady Wisdom, you have the Madam Folly, and you'll notice where wisdom is oftentimes talked about as a female character. She comes through and she's dressed well. She wants the best for her husband. She listens well. She talks well. Everything is to help her husband. And the father is saying, this is the woman you need. Then you have Dame Folly or Madam Folly. And this is the lady who is always trying to cheat, always trying to tempt, always saying, listen, I love you. And since I love you, or if you really love me, you would do this or that or whatever else. And so folly or silliness or foolishness is also put into the character of a woman. And so you see him walking by, and you can just imagine a man saying, this is the woman you need, that's the woman you don't need, going back and forth. And of course, then we end with the virtuous woman, and we're all pretty aware of that. And so that's how Proverbs works. But tonight we're going to look at family relationships, and we're going to see what Proverbs says about husbands and how they treat their wives, about wives and how they treat their husbands, how parents treat their children, and how children treat their parents. And so what I've done with Proverbs was I did the old cut and paste model. And so I went to a Bible program, and I had every verse in the book of Proverbs there on my little computer program. And what I did was, I thought, okay, I'm going to make 5 different categories. I did this in my Bible study just a year or so ago. I'm going to make 5 different categories, and every time the book of Proverbs talks about family, I'm going to put it over here. Every time the book of Proverbs talks about money, I'm going to put it over here. Every time the book of Proverbs talks about God, I'm going to put it over here. And so that's what I decided to do. I came up with 17 different categories finally, because some of them just got so big you had to split them. And what we're going to study as we go through this quarter is 13 of those categories. So what we'll see as we go through is word by word or verse by verse, every verse in Proverbs that has to do with the subject. And so hopefully that won't be tedious. I think it might be a better way to study Proverbs and look it over. If not, we'll change it in the middle of it because we're in charge and we can do whatever we want. So, but we're going to try it this way. But look at this. This is something that teacher Sammy Jones used to teach us in the graduate program at Freed-Hardeman in our counseling class. The power of the local congregation is seen through the power of individual families. If you get families that have good marriages, families that have good youth groups, families that have good children, the church is stronger. Society, as you look in the sociological aspect of it, is stronger when you have the nuclear family working together as a general whole. And so it's something important. And so that's one of the reasons why this is important to look at. Now we're going to see, and it's a little small, but we can survive because you can see it in your Bibles if you'd like to look it up. Go over to Proverbs chapter 5 and let's look at verse 15. And the writer of Proverbs is pretty funny the way he puts stuff. They thought of things a little bit different than we think of them. But as he went through, you'll notice as we go through in Proverbs chapter 5, and if you're interested in the way in which this is broken up, you can look up, I put all my Bible class materials and on the sermons and bulletin articles all in a little, it's a blog post, but it's not a blog post because I'm not hip enough to have a blog. But it's in that format. The address to it, if you're into that sort of thing, is Mark, that's me, Mark D, letter D, my middle name is Daniel, Mark D. Ray, okay? Period, WordPress, period, com, okay? markdray.wordpress.com. And if you go there, you'll see my picture. I'm smiling real big at you. But don't click on my picture because I don't know what that'll do. But go up to where it says Bible classes, and you'll see, I think we're up to about 60 different 13-week courses if you go through there. Click on Wisdom from the Master, and it will give you something like this. It's about 80 pages, but it's more or less what we're doing as we go through here. What we're doing is a little bit shorter because the preacher preaches too long and song leader leads too many songs. So I got to shorten it up. All right, chapter 5, verse 15. That's enough of that information. Notice what he says about a husband here. He says, husbands, a key for a successful marriage is find satisfaction in your spouse. A man grows up, goes to college, he sees a beautiful lady, and he marries her, right? Stays married for a while, and he decides, man, this lady is old. She's like 26, right? So then he goes and he marries somebody else because he found somebody prettier. Then he goes after a few years and finds somebody else and marries her because she's prettier. He goes and on and on and on. And finally, his wife leaves him because she wants somebody better looking, right? And that's what happens a lot in our society. People are married, but when you're married to somebody and you're so close to them, a lot of other people look a whole lot better, right? And so what the writer of Proverbs is saying here is find a way to find satisfaction in your spouse. All right, let's go ahead and read here. 5:15. He says, drink water from your own cistern and running water from your own well. Should your fountains be dispersed abroad and streams of water in the streets, let them be only your own and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed. Rejoice with the wife of your youth. As a loving deer and a graceful doe, let her breast satisfy you at all times and always be enraptured with her love. You go over to chapter 27 and look at verse 8. He says, like a bird that wanders from its nest is the man who has decided to wander from his place. And so what you see here is where the writer is saying, imagine your wife as being your fountain. And imagine how sweet the water tastes wherever it is you're from. You want to always go back there. You want to appreciate it, and you want to have a part of it. And so, however it is, find satisfaction in the marriage that you've created, in the home in which you had. And that's the very first thing he says as far as a key to marriage. Next thing, over in chapter 15, if you want to go there, don't fight for no reason. Now, that's a double negative, right? Avoid quarrels when you need to. Now, the most important thing you've got to know when you get married is how to fight. And whenever I'm doing marriage counseling, that's what I always say. When we start off, you got to learn how to fight. And of course, those two people are always in love, and they say, well, we never fight. And you say, well, that's the point. You got to learn how to fight. People have been married for 60 years, and they'll be at their anniversary party, and they'll say, listen, we have never had a fight. Well, you know how that's happened? They've redefined what the word fight means. Okay? Because you put two people together, sometime there's going to be a difference in opinion. For some people, that's a fight. For other people, it's a disagreement. For other people, it just means he's wrong. Right? Okay? You've got to learn how to communicate and communicate in a good, proper way. So let's look at some of these. And some of these are kind of funny. If you're teaching a middle school class, the guys like this part, right? A dinner of herbs where love is better than a fatted calf where there's hatred. Chapter 19, verse 13. A foolish son is the ruin of his father. The contentions of a wife are a continual dripping. And boy, we're going to come up with that dripping a lot. There's one about the being on the edge of a house. 21 verse 9, better to dwell in the corner of a housetop than a house shared with a contentious woman. It's better to dwell in the wilderness than with a contentious and angry woman. A continual dripping on a very rainy day and a contentious woman are alike. Whoever restrains her restrains the wind, and it's like he's trying to grasp oil with his hand. All right. Touching the chauvinistic side there, right? But it's written by a man, generally for men. And it probably can switch around as well, talking about how men, and maybe you work with somebody, or maybe you're at school with somebody, and you listen to them talk, and you're like, oh man, this is contentious. It's just like a constant dripping. It's driving me crazy. You ever have a sound in your house that drives you crazy? Every once in a while, one of the doors in the house will squeak. And when there's a door that squeaks, for some reason, one of the boys suddenly sees the need to use that door about 20 times a minute. You ever feel that way? That's what this guy's talking about here. If you always are fighting, it's just going to be something that builds up and builds up and builds up and builds up, and the pressure is going to get stronger and greater and more unbearable. And so a key to a happy marriage is learning how to fight. Or a better way to say it may be learning how to communicate. That's important to be able to do. Next key for a successful marriage, follow God's plan. Looking there in chapter 24, he says in this passage, through wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. By knowledge the rooms are filled with all the pleasant and the precious riches which are there. And so it's important when we think about that, about living by God's plan. How do you live by God's plan in a marriage? What are some of God's rules? Know any right offhand? Besides the guys make coffee, the Bible says Hebrews. What are some of the rules we find in the Bible about marriage? Stay faithful. Okay. Stay faithful. Matthew 19:9. Good passage. Think of any others? For better, for worse, okay? No matter what happens, you hang on and go through it, okay? Love your wife, love your husband as yourself. That's right. Wives, love your husbands, right? Submit to your husbands, as Ephesians 5:22-33 would say, even as the church submits to Christ. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church. He gave himself up for her. He nourishes her with his own body. He gives up everything in the world so that she might be praised, and it may go well, okay? Live by God's plan. A lot of times people use an example of a shape, the triangle. And imagine God's at the top of your triangle. And you got your husband on one side, your wife on the other. As the two grow closer to God, guess what happens? They grow closer to one another. Okay? A key or a determining factor in a happy marriage is the two have to have something in common. And the strongest indicator of what they can have in common is a relationship with God. So that's important when we look at the keys of a successful marriage. Now, this one will be small again. Go to chapter 3. And it's a lengthy passage as we look in chapter 3. Almost every verse. We'll skip 9 and 10, some of those verses there. But we see here the importance of a father teaching his son. Now, you go back in Bible days, they didn't have university like we do, and they really didn't have public school necessarily like we do. Who taught you your trade? Generally, your father would, right? Okay, and so just about every Jewish man had a trade that he could do with his hands. Remember, Paul was not only a rabbi and not only a teacher, but also a what? He was a tent maker. Jesus was a carpenter. Paul was a tent maker. And what the saying is that everybody quotes when they're going through it comes through a fellow that Josephus quoted. So, whether that's accurate or not, the saying in the first century was, if you don't teach your boy to work with his hands, you're teaching your boy to beg for his food. And so even if a boy went to college, even if a boy had great prospects, he still would have to learn how to do something with his hands. He needed to, if everything fell apart, be able to make a living for himself. And so here you have Paul, who can make tents, even though he's doing this, everything else in such a great way. Jesus, for the first, we think, 30 years of his life, probably was a carpenter. Peter and John, James, a lot of them were fishermen, right? And so you see here a father teaching a son. It was important not only to teach them a job, but to teach them who they were and that heritage of following God. So let's look at some of this. Look in chapter 3, verse 1. Okay? My son, do not forget my law, and let your heart keep my commands. For your length of day and long life and peace they will add to you. Let not mercy and truth forsake you. Bind them around your neck and write them upon the tablet of your heart. And so find favor and high esteem in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. It will be health to your flesh and strength to your bones. Now skip down to verse 11. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor detest his correction. For whom the Lord loves, he corrects, just as a father the son in whom he delights. My son, let them not depart from your eyes. Keep sound wisdom and discretion, so that they will be life to your soul and grace to your neck. Then they will walk safely in your way, and your foot will not stumble. When you lie down, you will not be afraid. Yes, you will lie down, and your sleep will be sweet. Okay? If you're reading your Bibles, go look at 25 and 26. Do not be afraid of sudden terror, nor trouble from the wicked when it comes. The Lord will always be your confidence, and he will not allow your feet to be caught in the trap. All right, just read that lengthy passage, almost that whole chapter. What did you get out of that? What is his father trying to get across to his son? Do you know? Sometimes when we read a lot of scripture, we kind of zone out a little bit. What's his father trying to get across?
Follow God, trust in God.
Trust in God completely, and he will always take care of you. Don't trust on yourself. See there in verses 5 and 6. Don't trust in your own understanding, but always, always put God first. Verse 26, he's not going to put you in that trap. He will always provide a way of escape, as Paul would say much later. And so it's important for us always to remember the way in which he will keep us. All right? What are some things fathers need to teach their boys and daughters today? If you're talking to a new father and he came to you and he said, what do I do besides change diapers? What would you give, especially as spiritual instruction, as advice to a young father today? Raise that child and what? Raise that child to give back to God. Okay, I like that. In the early part of 1 Samuel, Hannah, she said, you belong to the Lord, when she's talking about Samuel. She came back.
Children become what their fathers lots of times are. Example is
Right.
children follow the parents' example.
Example and
In
influence.
most cases.
In most cases, children are going to grow up and become whatever their daddy is or their mama is, right? Not always, but usually that is the case. They really imitate their parents. And so it's not only important to say the right things, it's also important to do the right things. Okay. That's right. Okay.
Teach them the word. Always
Teach them the word. Okay. Every opportunity. All right. Good. Anything else?
Do not spare the rod.
Oh, don't spare the rod. Yes. Yes, we have somebody who is excited about discipline. Child Services has already been called. Oh, I thought I had that coming up, Tyler. I was so excited, and now I don't know where I am. You know, that's kind of the case in my life sometimes. Yeah. Which, thank you for nobody saying amen. Well, I skipped my correction part. So let's look at some verses of correction, okay? Chapter 13, 24. The father needs to discipline his child, okay? 13:24. He who spares the rod does what to his son? He who spares the rod hates his son. He who loves him disciplines him promptly. Chasten your son while there is hope, and do not set your heart on his destruction. That's 19:18. 20 and verse 30, blows that hurt cleanse away evil, as do stripes the inner depths of the heart. That's pretty serious right there. Blows that hurt will cleanse away evil, and as do stripes from the inner depths of the heart. 23:13, do not withhold correction from a child. If you beat him with a rod, he will not die. All right? That's serious right there. I really like reading these after I've moved out of the house. 23:24, the father of the righteous will greatly rejoice, and he who begets a wise child will delight in him. Let's talk about discipline for a second. Dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. Discipline, okay? Does the Bible command you to spank your kid? Is that a command? No. What do we have here is he's talking about the idea of, using the rod and striping, sending those stripes to cleanse the heart. What's he trying to say about discipline here? Or what's a form of discipline?
There's got to be consequences.
There's got to be consequences to actions. Okay? They've got to realize if I do this, then this will happen, right? If I do this, then this will happen. I've learned over the last several years, I can smack my kids and they don't really care that much. And that may speak to my wimpiness. But boy, I take away a cell phone and the world has come to an end, right? That cell phone will magically make a C turn into an A. Not overnight, but really fast, okay? Now, what am I doing there? You have to know your child well enough to know what affects them. To know, okay, this is what motivates that person. And if you've had more than one kid, have you noticed that they're any different? Are they any different sometimes? Okay. One, you can just look at and the world will end, right? And the other one you look at and it's just like he says, well, bring it on, right? Well, you've got to know how to work with them. But a lot of times we misunderstand this idea of discipline. We think, well, if I don't discipline him, that shows I love him. Is that showing love? It's showing laziness, isn't it? And it's actually showing that you don't care about that child. Is it hard on parents to discipline their children? You remember that old saying, well, son, this hurts me worse than it hurts you. And the kid's always like, well, okay, let's trade places, right? Okay. But is it hard to discipline your children? It is, isn't it? Because if you ground them, guess what? You got to stay home with them, right? If you keep them from doing something, you've got to actually watch and make sure that they don't do it. And so it's harder, but if you really love your child, you're going to teach them to go in the right way. Now, in some families, that's spanking, okay? Not physical damage, but encouragement to do well. In other families, maybe it's time out. In other families, whatever it is, but you need to know your child well enough to know what affects them, to know what motivates them to go one way or the other. Now, let's talk about that for a little bit, because I know we usually like talking about that kind of stuff. What are some things you did in disciplining your children? Do you remember growing up? My dad had a belt. It had the little metal deals on the belt. Okay, he had a special belt for me, right? And I remember sitting around in elementary school describing my dad's belt, and somebody was like, well, my dad had a paddle. Did any of y'all's parents have one of those special little things? What'd they use?
Peachtree limbs.
Peachtree limbs, yes. Did you have to go out and cut your own limb? I've heard people say that before. What you got, Lori? A switch. Did you have to cut your own switch? No, they got to do it for you, huh? Ooh.
You know those toys with the balls that bounces back?
Yeah.
Well, once that breaks, you know it's going to be
Once that breaks, you're in trouble. So in your house, you're being real nice. Jerry, I bet those things lasted a long time in your house. Okay. All right. Huh? Fingernails. Was that a special hold that would happen in church?
Fly swatter works pretty good.
A fly swatter worked pretty well. Okay.
Had her most interest in eighth grade students, and her dad said she couldn't watch TV, but he didn't take it out. You know, he's just
Right.
give her. But he caught her watching TV. He didn't take it out. He just took the bedroom door off the hinges for 6 weeks.
That was encouragement right there, wasn't it? All right. All right. He knew what would work. Still remembered all these years later. All right. How about anybody else? So we're mainly a switchy kind of church. Time out, yes. Oh, the time out, yes. Okay.
I always appreciated those parents that would count to 10 several times in a row and the kids still do what they said.
Oh, yes.
Do what they wanted to.
Yeah, Bob talks about the kid, you'd count to a kid. I remember so much. This is when I first started preaching, and I knew everything. You know how young preachers are. They know everything. And I remember sitting there in the nursery. I think I was picking up my kid, and this other lady was over there talking to a 2-year-old. And she said, I'm going to count to 3, and you better lay your toy down. And we said 1, 2, 2.5, 2 3/4. I was thinking, that kid can't count. Beat the kid. You can't count. He doesn't know. I didn't say that. I still had a job, so it was good. All right. Now, looking at it from the back way, not only should a father discipline his son, not only should a father teach his son, but it's interesting looking in through Scripture how a father is affected by his children. And you see this a lot all through Scripture. A wise son makes a glad father. A foolish son is the grief of his mama, right? 17 verse 2, a wise servant is going to rule over a son who causes shame, and he's going to share an inheritance among all of his brothers. In other words, you can have a slave, but the slave is smart. All the children are dumb. Guess what? The children are going to lose their position. A foolish son is a grief to his father, and bitterness to her who bore him. 23 verse 15, my son, if your heart is wise, my heart will rejoice indeed. I myself, yes, my inmost being will rejoice when your lips speak the right things. One of the beautiful things we've had happening here at Benton is a lot of our kids have been baptized lately, right? And what is really, really neat when that happens, what I really push for when it happens, is for the father or a family member to baptize his child. And when that happens, it's just the most beautiful thing ever, isn't it? And it's wonderful to see the reaction of a father when his son is doing well. Have you seen it at football games or basketball games? You'll sit there and watch, and you can tell, when a son is doing good out there and, hitting threes or hitting free throws or whatever else it may be, you can oftentimes look in a crowd and see the mama, right? Or you can see the daddy, like, yeah, we're doing great. It's kind of neat seeing that and how all that works together. So the father's affected. All right, as we go a little bit further, mother, we turn to it from the mother's side. A mother teaches her children. Chapter 6, verse 20, my son, keep your father's command. Do not forsake the law of your mother. Bind them always around your heart, tie them around your neck. When you roam, they will lead you. When you sleep, they will keep you. When you're awake, they will speak to you. The commandment will always be a lamp and a law to the light, reproofs or instruction in the way of life. All right, stereotypically, okay, generally, which is not always the case, mothers and fathers have different effects on their children, right? Oftentimes, of course, this once again is just a generalization. Men are more on the fact side, right? Ladies are usually more on the emotional side. Now, does that mean that one side does all the discipline, or should one side do all the teaching? They both have a responsibility. God made them different so they can teach in different ways, so they can have that effect in both ways. So that's something there. Now, as we go a little further, we see also where a mother is affected by her children. Chapter 15, verse 20, a wise man makes his father glad, foolish man despises his mother. I think we just looked at that one. He who mistreats his father and chases away his mother is a son who causes shame and who brings reproach. In other words, mothers need to be treated with respect, right? And so that's something really important, which we don't do very well in our culture. 23:22, listen to the father who begot you. Do not despise your mother when she is old. The father of the righteous will greatly rejoice, and he who begets a wise child will always delight in him. This is a goal of life right here, okay? Let your father and mother be glad. Let the woman who birthed you rejoice that she birthed you, right? You ever see these ladies that say, I brought you into this world and I'm going to take you out, right? Try to keep your mother from having that attitude, okay? Make it where she remembers that day fondly that she had you. That's something important. All right, now turn to chapter 4. Get to chapter 4 and let's look at verse 10. A child needs to learn from his parents. Okay? Chapter 4 and verse 10. Hear, my son, and receive my sayings. The years of your life will be many. I have taught you in the way of wisdom. I've led you in the right paths. When you walk, your steps will not be hindered. When you run, you will not stumble. Take firm hold of your instruction and do not let go. Keep her, for she is your life. My son, give attention to my words. Incline your ears to my say. Do not let them depart from your eyes, and keep them in the midst of your heart. For they are life to those who find them, and health to all their flesh. Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it springs the issues of life. Put away from you a deceitful mouth, and put perverse lips far from you. Let your eyes look straight ahead, and your eyelids look right before you. Ponder the path of your feet, and let all your ways be established. Do not turn to the right or to the left, and always remove your feet from evil. It goes through the entire body, talking about how each part of the body needs to be sure to follow the right way. Children have a responsibility to learn, and they need to learn from their parents good and spiritual things. As Bill said a second ago, oftentimes kids will imitate their parents, right? And they'll learn how to talk from their parents, and they'll learn what they like to eat from their parents, and they learn their view of God from their parents. Until a child reaches the age of 4, they usually equate God with their parents. Sometimes a preacher will get in the way, and sometimes people think that preacher up there is God because he comes with a booming voice, or in my case, a squeaky voice from the pulpit, right? But usually, when a child grows older, what their view of God is pretty close to what their view of their parents were until they're age 3 or 4. And so a child needs to learn to respect his parents and needs to learn to treat them with reverence and honor. And we as parents, especially parents of younger children, need to show the love of God to our children, because that, at least in a subliminal way, is going to make a huge, huge difference to them. All right. Our last slide, which we're going to look at here, a child is affected by his parents, right? Chapter 15, verse 5, a fool despises his father's instruction, but he who receives correction, that man is prudent. A wise son makes his father's glad, but a foolish man despises his mother. The righteous man walks in his integrity, and the children are blessed after him. Look at chapter 20, verse 11. We quoted this on Sunday morning. Maybe we remember. Even a child is known by his deeds, and whether what he does is pure and right. You know kids by the things that they do, right? We could probably think in our mind, and we know, let's see, we got 5 more minutes of class. We know in 10 minutes who's going to be the little knothead running around, right? And we can think in our mind, okay, if something got knocked over in church, it's probably this kid or that kid or whoever else it may be. We kind of identify children by the actions that they do. Well, a lot of times children, as was said before, are a reflection of their parents. 28 verse 24, whoever robs his father and mother and says it's no transgression, the same is a companion to a destroyer. In other words, he who mistreats his parents and doesn't believe it's a big deal, believes that it's okay, the writer of Proverbs says that fellow is not going to be around long. It's not going to end well for that guy. It's like one of the guys in Star Trek wearing red. You see a guy in Star Trek wearing red, do not stand next to him. All right, chapter 30, verse 17. The eye that mocks his father and scorns obedience to his mother, the ravens of the valley will pick it out, and the young eagles will eat it. All right, now that's a little on the gross side right there, isn't it? Talking about how the buzzards are going to eat him because he's going to die very soon. What the writer of Proverbs here is saying is you better realize the effect your parents have on you. Now, why is that bad in our culture today? What do most of the younger generation think of the older generation? They think they're old, right? But generally, what's the typical idea there? They're old-fashioned. They can't keep up with the times. They're ignorant. They're closed-minded. And there's a lot of that. What I find interesting is there's a lot of that brought up with this millennial generation thing that we're talking about. You know, Generation X, Generation Y, millennial, going back to baby boomers and things such as that. But a lot of what we accuse millennials of going through today are the same thing that we had in the 60s. And some of the people in here probably grew up in the 60s. In the 60s, what was the view of their parents? Did they have a high regard for parents? Don't trust anyone over 30. Yes, absolutely. Who said that? Was that somebody in the Beatles? You said that. Well, I've heard it quoted quite often. Somebody said that. Don't trust anyone over 30. You see the Woodstock generation and how they rebelled and went against much of the conservatism in the 1950s. Now, why do you think we do that? The younger generation thinks they're so much better than the older generation. Why do you think that happens so often?
They're not very smart.
They're not very smart. They're very immature, right? Okay?
Well, they're not disciplined and they're not taught.
They're not disciplined, they're not taught very well, okay?
Not taught respect.
They're not taught to respect. Remember back when you were 25, okay? How did you feel? Did you have the knee aches and the back aches that you do now? You could do anything in this world you wanted to, right? And a lot of folks, especially back then, if you had the 60s and 70s muscle cars, did you ever drag down the street? What did they call it here? Did they call it drag racing?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Where was the drag strip down here? It's out towards Fair Dealing, isn't it? Is that where they used to run? Nobody admits it. Okay. But I think down there is where they used to go. All right. Why do people in their 25, 20, teenage, why do they do so much stupid stuff? You're going to live forever, right? You are an adult now. You're going to live forever. You have freedom. And a lot of times when we have that attitude, suddenly people who teach any form of restraint, we push them off, right? And that's our culture we have now. And one of the reasons why so many people are turning away from the church is they see, it's people trying to restrain me and do stuff, trying to push me in. I remember talking to a person, they would fit in the millennial generation. I was talking to that person about, maybe coming to church and being here. And what that guy said to me was, I'm not going to come to church. I'm not going to come listen to somebody tell me all the things I can't do. And I said, well, that's not what church is about. And he said, yeah, it is. Well, that's a view a lot of the world has. Church is nothing more than somebody trying to throw a restraint on you. Little do they realize they're slaves of sin, and the Lord will give freedom and make you a slave of righteousness. And so church is not about saying what you can't do. Church is about saying what you can be, right? Saved by the blood and the grace of Christ. But a lot of times that's there, and that's the attitude we get. All right? How do we bridge that divide between young and old in the church? Is there a way to bridge the divide? What are some suggestions you would have? Relationships. Okay. Spend some time with folks. Good, good. Excellent. Communicate. Okay. Get to know these people and let them get to know you. All right. Establish relationships. Communicate. Anything else? Does that bind it up pretty good? Yeah, listen to them. All right. Talking about relationships, talking about communicate. That's what I was going to say. Respect may be the key word there. Recognize those folks that they're 20, 25, there's a lot they had to contribute. There's a lot of energy there. There's a lot of dreaming there. I think one of the things that hits us in the church, that hinders us in the church, we don't dream. We're super practical. And we don't say, man, look at what we could pull off here. Look what we could do by faith in God. And a lot of times when that dreaming is not taking place in the congregation, it's because the younger people aren't being listened to. The younger people aren't engaged. You got to dream, okay? But respect also needs to be given to the older generation, correct? We got to love and respect one another. All right, well, we have finished that part, and so look at that. That button even worked. I'm going to learn how to use this. So thank you very much for being here. We'll get together again Sunday.